Welcome to the Shuffle Dating Podcast. I am Andy, co-founder of Shuffle, your host, and I'm here with Sheridan. Sheridan, thanks for coming. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. My name is Sheridan, and I am actively dating. I attended a Shuffle event, and I also happen to be a healthy relationship educator and have been for the past 5 or so years. And so took a real interest in what y'all are trying to do and happy to be collaborating.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for reaching out to us. And I will state a disclaimer here that Sheridan is just here to represent her own individual views and is not representing the views of any organizations or institutions with which you may be affiliated. So we're just talking with a citizen and customer of Shuffle here. Okay. First, I wanted to maybe linger a sec on you and your background, because I think it's really interesting, like what you've learned about healthy relationships in like the work you do.
Yeah, definitely. So my work has primarily been in educating young people. And for me, that kind of entails like middle and high school students about healthy relationships and therefore, some unhealthy relationship signs to look out for. And then within that, there's just so many different like topics and facets you can take it in. And I just say about, like 5.5 years ago, I got involved with programs that train trusted adults and educators, coaches to actually speak with young people about the relationships they're having and, whether or not they are being perceived as healthy and what they can do in general to act healthier and prevent violence long term. It's kind of in the domestic violence prevention education realm. And that's how I sort of got a foothold in this field. And then I've just taken it from there. And yeah, it's really interesting work. It's something that gets me out of bed every day, for sure.
Can I ask, what is something maybe that is surprising to you that you've learned, or maybe personally relevant as it applies to your own like dating journey? Have you like learned things that are particularly impactful for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the more surprising things I've learned, or I guess just the thing that a lot of people like, it helps them feel really like validated to say out loud, is that we all do unhealthy things. Like, and that doesn't give everyone a free pass, but we all come from different experiences and we all, sometimes act in ways that don't represent the best of ourselves, whether we're like stressed or angry or somebody's hurt our feelings and we lash out in whatever way we might. So anytime I, talk to young people, I keep in mind and I let them know that like, we're not trying to call anyone out. We're not trying to call anyone abusive. Really just saying we all do these things and we can fix it. We can act in healthier ways. So I think doing some self-reflection through the work that I do and just noticing like, oh yeah, these are the things that when I'm feeling defensive or I'm feeling like called out or hurt, these are the things that I might do. And here's like how I can take a second to think about that and try to act better for the other person as well as myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. That feels like such a good life lesson in general, like not only for relationships, but almost anything, right?
Definitely. I know I'm like almost jealous of young people, high schoolers and middle schoolers who are learning this so much earlier, because it's something that only occurred to me like once I started this work and was like, we hear it all the time, like you just could have used it earlier.
Yeah, we tell folks on our team, right? Like it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, this podcast is going to be far from perfect, and we can own that, right? And be like, here's how we could or should, improve. But like, it's okay. We're not all perfect humans. Can I ask you about your experience with Shuffle, maybe for folks who have never been to an event and they're like, what is this thing? Could you tell us like some highs and lows and maybe what a new person coming in can expect?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll go even further back and just say that I saw like posters for Shuffle posted around the city I live in and was super curious about it as somebody who is very fatigued by app dating, for sure. Just finding that it's not really the way I connect with people, wanting to get out of this stats first mindset, sort of. So I was like instantly intrigued, texted all of my single friends about it and tried to get them to come with me. But that was also an interesting conversation we are looking at like different age ranges. And I never knew that. So I think that was very telling. And now I'm seeing seeing that y'all have theme-based nights, which I think is really cool. I'm curious how that conversation would go with friends as well. I feel like I'm learning about my single friends as well as the people that I meet at the events. Yeah, so I'm trying to think of like beginning to end. I would say
it doesn't have to be beginning to end, just some points of interest. What was notable for you?
Yeah, definitely notable was like the feeling of like nervousness walking in. If anybody tends to be like on the more nervous side, I would recommend bringing a single friend maybe so you can both like, order a drink together or like just sit around and like chit chat before. But I luckily had a really nice like host bartender and she came over and started chatting to me about like, oh, I love this night. It's so wholesome. Like, I love working this. We're going to have a great time. So that made me feel a lot more at ease. And then yeah, the actual event of it, like as soon as that first notification went off and started meeting people, it just felt really, describe it to people almost like a house party, like where, maybe a friend has brought you and you don't know that many people, but you have these like brief conversations with people and they varied. Like some of us used the icebreaker questions and then other people just kind of like went straight into like asking questions off the cuff. I'd say it was like 50 of conversations that were more like random and then some that were just like, oh, how long have you lived in the city and what do you do, and that kind of thing, which again I think is very similar to like a house party. People like present or like introduce themselves in different ways. Yeah, and then it seemed like all of a sudden it was over kind of. I remember like about halfway through there's a break and I was, wow, like it was a little bit exhausting, I will say, as someone who's like a little introverted. After 7 I was like, oh, like that took it out of me for sure, but it felt good to like have met that many people. So trying to think too, like I wasn't very on top of the note taking, to be honest, and I wish I had been for later. It just seemed a little rude, like there's 2 minutes in between or something that technically you're supposed to take notes, but a lot of people wanted to just keep talking. And I was like, well, I'm not going to be like, here, let me look at this, like just stare down at my phone and take notes instead of talk to you. But in retrospect, that might have been like a good boundary to set.
We're gonna try to help with that in the future. We're launching some like text-based notifications to be like, the round has ended, so that in case people don't have their phone open and out, they kind of just get that alert buzzing in their pocket, hopefully, and it will empower people to withdraw and retreat and have a little more alone time to do the note taking and whatnot. So yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I think you said a bunch of interesting stuff, but I think one thing you mentioned that is worth highlighting maybe is for introverts, it can be exhausting. And I think it's interesting because that is almost the nature of like dating and putting yourself out there, right? Like it's an exhausting activity. And so it's good to be reminded, like, this is not swiping on an app for 2 hours, right? You're in person. There could be music at the bar. A lot of stuff could be happening. It's new people, some of the people you might not like, and you're stuck with them for a few minutes. So yeah, that can be an overwhelming experience for some people. And we've had people actually be like, hey, I'm like way too stimulated and need to leave the event. And so I would say in that case, please like let us know, text us, the event host who's online. We'll try to work with you on that. But for you, Sheridan, I guess it was exhausting at the end, but you felt it was rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like because you are paying for it, it's like a paid event. I was like, well, I want to get my money's worth kind of thing. Like I think any less would have felt like I guess like 5 to 7, I think is like the perfect range. And I know that you guys cap it at 7 usually.
Right. We've actually raised it to 9 in case people no show or cancel so that you get at least 6 or 7, because we've had a few cancellations where it's like, I don't really want 4 or 5 when I pay for 7. So we did increase it and we made the rounds a little shorter.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I love getting this inside info.
We're experimenting. We're always experimenting. So like, yeah, as you saw, the themes are new. I think the pet owner theme is probably going to go away because that doesn't really work. But like the kids know kids thing is maybe something we'll keep. We're not sure. And any feedback is welcome. Do you have things you think we should improve on?
Ooh, great question. Well, I'm actually curious, quick bookmark. Why is the pet owner one going to go away?
We're going to rephrase it first.
Okay.
So actually today, I think it's getting rephrased to open to pets. Like you don't have to be a pet owner. Specifically, the guy side was having way fewer signups.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So usually we have like too many younger men under age 30 are a huge, like aggressively signing up population. And then women under age 30 are a little bit harder to get signups for. But funnily enough, for the pet thing, it flips and there's a ton of women signing up, and then there's not enough younger guys. Men don't know how to take responsibility for things. So the pet owner is like a tough sell.
That is so interesting. I never would have thought. I mean, how great that you like made a space for. I mean, not that like the entire world isn't a space for men under 30, but like I feel like I'm actually surprised by that it's less women, more men signing up.
I mean,
not for pets, obviously.
Why are you surprised? I feel like this is Tinder. Like Tinder's just a bunch of dudes swiping all the time, and like a few women being like, oh, maybe.
That's true. I don't know. I guess maybe I see, I don't know, like given like any like house party I go to, I do feel like the women are like tend to be more like outwardly social. Like you'll sometimes see like a group of guys like standing in the corner, like quietly talking. I guess I think of women as being more like extroverted.
That's the problem, is these events are for people who need an event as opposed to like having their life include socialization.
That's true. It's cool though. It's like carving out a space. I just read this really interesting, and this is totally all going to get slashed because it's me just paraphrasing research, but
that's what we're here for.
I read this really amazing study it's an organization called Equimundo, and they did a really in-depth study on they call it like the state of the American man or something, and it's about like men and connection seeking behaviors and like as it relates to like masculinity and feminism and like all this stuff. And it was just very interesting about like where they're finding community and where they're gathering. So one of my previous jobs was working specifically in masculinity work, and that's still like an interest of mine. So I'm very curious about that.
Oh, we should totally talk about that. Yeah. But I want to maybe get through a couple other things first. If we have time, I will circle back. Can we, just closing the loop on your experience with Shuffle, I guess, do you recommend it to other folks? It sounds like you did want your other friends to try it, but after having gone through it now, like, would you come again? And how likely are you to recommend, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend it. I got home and instantly told my roommates, who are both single and dating, you guys would love it. Like, you would thrive there. I think it's a really positive environment. I think one of my like worries that was in the back of my mind was that I would go and be made uncomfortable by something, or I don't know if that's just negative mindset or what it was, but it was very positive and everyone was really respectful and nice. And so, yeah, I would definitely recommend it. Like, at least try it. I think for people who are looking to like make a connection in real life, I think it's like a really good option, and it gives another option than like typical dating apps or like things like that. Yeah, and I will most likely go again. I think I like need some time. I realized in like my reflections afterward and in like the dates that I had afterward, I was like, maybe I'm actually not that actively into dating right now, which was an interesting reflection. And it was not the event itself. It's just, I think I was like, oh yeah, like this is what dating is. It had been a while since I was in the world of dating. It's like, whew, okay. Got a lot of other stuff going on, and I don't know if I have like mental bandwidth for it at the moment.
Yeah, as a whole, like the dating process can be so much energy and like not a lot of reward until you like stumble across your person, which is potentially a very like you meet 7 random people, right? So how likely is it that one of them's actually going to be your like one person? Like, unfortunately, maybe you need to meet 50 people before you like have a shot at finding someone with really good chemistry that doesn't exhaust you to be around. So I feel like that's an investment of time and hours, right? And if you like don't have that space in your life, it's certainly like a trade-off, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really good way to put it. It's just, I mean, odds wise, like it feels like meeting 7 people in a night is like, so you're meeting so many people, like odds are high, but 7 in a sea of however many is like nothing. It's like a drop in the bucket.
It's more than a night watching TV, but
yeah, it's like 7 first dates. Like, think about your energy levels for that. I mean, not as long form, but yeah. So
can we talk real quick about rejection? And potentially we have a lot of folks who, for whatever reason, I mean, we just have a whole events where nobody matches with anyone. There's some events on the other side, right, where everyone gets at least one match, which is amazing, and we're really happy to see that. But then there's some events where it just doesn't happen, and there's some people that might get upset if they don't have a match in this event that they like paid for, and maybe they even felt that they were really into someone. We actually do get some folks following up afterwards being like, are you sure your system was correct? Because we chatted over the time limit. I'm like, oh no, please don't chat over the time limit. But I guess, do you have any thoughts on this?
Some thoughts, no. Oh, I got that. Yeah, I mean, I think the point, it was a really good segue, like the point you were making earlier of like, out of 7 people, like you might not find your person and you might get a match even and like follow through on like a second meetup or something like that. And it just turns out that like, yeah, that person was definitely worth another conversation, but it, revealed something about them or about your chemistry or what have you that just, it wasn't a match. So in terms of like rejection, like I totally understand why you have people writing in. I think that can feel very like humbling in the moment to be like, wow, I met 7 people and like not one, like even thought it was worth a second conversation or like a second date. Yeah, and rejection is something that like look into a lot in my work because I think especially young people today, and then that translates to like the millennial generation as well, like we're not taught really, we're a very high achieving, like perfection based culture. And so I think the idea of rejection and how to handle rejection is something we shy away from because even suggesting that somebody has been rejected is like, how could you? Like, how could you even say that to someone that this might not work out or that they might come out of this night without any matches? I think sets people up for this world where they're just not prepared in how to handle it. And like, again, myself included, I had to deal with for a long time the feeling of like in and out of dating and other things, just like, oh, if I get rejected or I get told no, like that is a direct reflection on me and like who I am as a person. And, they didn't like me. And especially in dating, like, yeah, that like rings true in a way that other things don't, like you get rejected from like a job. You think of like all the ways like, oh, maybe this wasn't on my resume or this and that. But when it's about, you as a person, and there's also like, I always encourage people like think of your conversations that night. Like you didn't want to date, or maybe you did, I'm not sure, but you didn't want to date all 7. And maybe you couldn't even put your finger on why. It was just like, I didn't feel it, or there was no chemistry. Like chemistry is such a fickle thing. And I think basing like self-worth or like self-image or like how well you did on whether or not somebody matched you is like you're just setting up for a spiral kind of thing. And so that's like my first thought, just like on rejection off the cuff.
Oh, there's so much good stuff in there.
Yeah, again, it's something that I like talk about often, especially when you're working with high schoolers or like it can hit hard. I remember last year around prom season, like that's always really tough, like promposals and all that. But things that I usually like suggest people, one, it's like look like outside of yourself in a way, like don't take it incredibly personally. Again, me paraphrasing a study that I read once, but I read a study about like rejection and breakups and like people who heal the fastest or who cope the fastest are people who believe that like the breakup or the rejection had nothing to do with who they are as a person. And so I always encourage people like, yeah, it sucks. Like feel that. Let yourself just like be like, oh man, that sucked. I went to this event. I put in all this effort and this energy and I'm bummed. But the one thing I always want people to steer away from, and this is something that like has been a pitfall of mine, is like, well, they didn't like me, so fuck them. Like, so they're the bad guy. Like they're the, also, I don't know if swearing's okay. I just swore, but
yeah, we're 21 plus.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of like turning it the other way around, like be kind to yourself, let yourself feel, hurt if you need to, or sadness or anger if you need to, and be kind to the other person, no matter who they are, no matter whether you see them again, like be kind to them in your mind. Because then that like sets you up for a really weird dynamic of like, if somebody doesn't like you, like they suck, which is not true. Yeah. And then keep at it if you can, but also if you like need a break, if you're just like, I don't want to do this again for a little bit, I need time to like heal or like think about things, like for sure do that. Yeah. And I think just like honoring the other person's decision is super important because it comes down to like respecting boundaries essentially, and like consent and non-consent, and no one ever really needs to like explain themselves. I know this is like oddly, people are reaching out to you to explain for other people. I'm actually curious about like that. Like, how does that feel?
Yeah, I will extend your be kind to the shuffle support email. We look at, the results. If someone wants us to double check, like we'll double check. We're not going to usually reach out to someone unless to like double check that they input the correct things. We assume that everyone input the correct things unless there's like actually an error in the system, or if there's like maybe multiple instances of like people reporting errors. But typically there's just like one person who's, upset about their results and or confused about the results and hasn't heard all this great advice from Sheridan about, I like the job interview piece that you said, like, you just don't get responses from like the majority of applications you put out there. And there's like no rhyme or reason. Also, like college admissions, like there's so many places in life where people are judging you and you have no idea like what the black box was that made them never talk to you again. But dating, I mean, I think you gave some examples. I mean, it could be like you mentioned Chinese food and they just like everything else about you, but they don't like Chinese food. And so they don't want to talk to you again. I'm so sorry, but you never know. And so we try to explain that. Like the results are kind of random. Like someone could just be having a bad day and they just passed on everyone. Like it has nothing to do with you, actually. So we kind of have like some templates that have a couple paragraphs of, the results are pretty high variance. We don't really have any evidence that this is incorrect. The system is functioning correctly overall. I'm sorry that you didn't receive a match. Yeah. There's some people that, don't receive. We can also see where like people have put match or pass on an individual. And sometimes like that individual hasn't matched someone, but they are liked by another person or vice versa, right? Mm. And then there's some individuals who have a pass from everybody. Mm. And those are usually the ones who are reaching out with questions about this. And in that case, we tend to know that it's not the system. It's something about those 10-minute conversations that didn't work out.
I think self-reflection is important as well, even like the event is happening, because I realized even in my conversations, I was like, damn, I like really interrogate people when I get uncomfortable. Like I know some people don't ask any questions because, I don't know, they just don't ask questions. But I'm like the opposite where I only ask questions. And I noticed that like 3 matches in and was just like, I need to like chill. And I could tell it was just like my anxiety that was doing that. So thinking about like, oh yeah, I'm like entering these conversations with a certain energy and like, let me try something different for the latter half of these. And I think that's something that would also bring me to come back to another event as well, as trying to be like more authentic to who I am and like less nervous. And I think that like comes with practice too. Like some people, myself included, yeah, you need practice and you need, especially if you've been like out of the dating world for a while or things like that. I think, yeah, that can just be really important. I'm curious too, do you ever share feedback in any way? Are you ever getting feedback? Because I think that seems correct, like from confidentiality standpoint. And I'm also like, when is there ever an opportunity really to like get some direct feedback? Like I being this like healthy relationship educator that I am, will occasionally give people feedback like in text, but only if it's like I was uncomfortable or like I don't know, just saying like, I feel like we're looking for different things or like this and that. And like, I know a lot of people don't do that. Like we're like the ghosting generation, So
yes.
I'm curious. And I guess maybe that's what this podcast is trying to accomplish as well.
We're trying to expose with as much transparency as possible kind of how all this all works and like how people are thinking and lots of different perspectives. So hopefully we can capture some of those questions here and I can kind of anonymously state like, here's some patterns we see. But for the time being, this is like a product 2.0, like on top of the platform at some point. Maybe there's a premium version where we use AI and like aggregate your feedback over time based on the notes and anonymize it, maybe in the future. But right now we have a pretty strict no advice, no feedback, no info on like other people's decisions policy. And we only really take action if like there's reports of users making others uncomfortable. In that case, we just ban people. But I banned someone today. That was fun.
Ooh, good time.
But no, it's good. It's good. It's a good question. I don't know if I fully answered it.
No, I think that makes sense. Like you want to protect people's like notes. And I could see, yeah, like a world where I don't know what platform it is that I used recently that was like you could give feedback. Oh, I think it was like a performance review process. You could give somebody's manager direct feedback to help share with them, or you could check like they can see this themselves, So yeah, something like that. I'm sure like AI would be helpful in some way in like, yeah, summarizing so that there's no like hard edges there where like somebody's being way too upfront or like critical. Because I think, yeah, feedback can also, talk about handling rejection as well, like getting a piece of feedback you don't like or like that you didn't even realize was, something that was happening, I think can be tough as well.
Yeah, for sure. The thing you were talking about before, your anxiety causing you to ask over many questions, is something we touched on in the first episode with dating coach Carla, who said a big tip for having good conversations in like a 10-minute intro is being comfortable with silence and allowing both sides to pick up slack in a conversation, as opposed to feeling like, because I had brought up the fact that sometimes people say, I didn't feel my partner was a great conversationalist. And there's 2 sides to that, right? Like one is maybe they suck at asking questions. questions and they need to learn, or something else, like they suck at listening. But the other side is on ourselves, right? Taking the responsibility of, oh, maybe I didn't think they were a great conversationalist because they just were trying to handle the flood of questions I threw at them and didn't have the space to take their side.
Definitely. Yeah, I would agree with that person's perspective when like it is like a fear of silence. Or like, I mean, I'm only speaking for myself, but yeah, like needing to fill the space, or it's that kind of like ulterior motive of like, is everyone having a good time? Like, want to make sure that like there's no silence, there's no lulls, like things like that. So I'm very curious to listen to episode 1 for sure.
But that's amazing. It's so self-aware of you that you like had these live reflections during the event and it was useful for yourself. That's awesome to hear. Couple like last things on my extra list here is, do you have questions for future guests or topics that you'd like me to cover on this podcast in the future?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm thinking of like, I have so many questions for like further along in dating, just with like trends I've seen either through work or like just through friends and whatnot about, I guess, just like when you're like deep dating phase. But I don't know if that's like applicable here because it's more, I don't know.
Eventually, I think there's only, I mean, with the whole like concept of meeting in person for dating as Shuffle is, we do want eventually to maybe do other kind of like make friends or professional networking. Like there's other ways of meeting people. And once you have met someone, you cease being our customer. And we obviously want you to be our customer forever. So like double dates and like, how do you deepen a relationship? These are all things that are very interesting to us, but it's not the focus right now, but definitely in the future, this podcast could become a forum to discuss relationships in all their forms. So yes.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay, that's interesting. I never thought about that from the customer side. It's like, yeah, you literally, if you are successful, you lose customers.
It's a problem with all dating companies, and
yeah,
it's like the churn problem. Like your customers churn, and it's a reason why like venture capital and dating is called like a tar pit space from a startup world. Like
I would have to agree. No.
It is a scary space in some ways, but it's like a known, people who want to make tons of money think that dating is a bad way to do it because this customer issue. I had written down like masculine, feminine archetypes, but I feel that's like a whole nother can of worms. So maybe we'll just end it here for this first chat with Sheridan. Thank you so much. Do you have anything else you want to share before we close with our Shuffle community? Anything we missed or final questions for me?
Oh, actually just like one reflection that I was like thinking about a little earlier. I would say if anyone listening is going to go to a Shuffle event, try to get out of the stats mindset. We talk about like dating app stats, like where someone lives, what they do for work, this and that. I think the most interesting conversations I had were when I didn't rely on those as like, again, like questions to ask or like things to know about somebody. It was like when we were just like riffing. Like that doesn't really matter in the long term, I don't think. Or like you'll learn that, I think it said on your website or something, like you'll learn that on your first date or whatever, but like keep that out of the Shuffle space. Like I would really recommend like using those icebreaker questions and just like staying away from that kind of talk, because then it just becomes like you're swiping in real life, it feels like.
So you're saying try to avoid logistical questions about people's like work, or like you kind of want to just try to have a more authentic interaction in those 10 minutes and maybe, talk about what are some examples of things that would be fun, like people's hobbies or just not even just being present to enjoy someone's company. And I think what you said earlier also ties into this, which is treating it just as an outing and not like a serious dating experience. Like you only have 10 minutes, so you're going to meet with them again if you match. And that's really when you can have a true conversation. Like this 10-minute thing is just for funsies. And if your friend comes with you and either participant or just someone for moral support sitting on the sidelines, like you're just there hanging out, and it's not this big deal where you have to, know about someone's marriage preferences and if they want to have kids and like.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think, just focusing on the I think I was trying to remember like the question that one of my like pairings and I started with, but we had this whole conversation about like travel or something that we wouldn't have had if it had started with like, oh, even things down to like what neighborhood do you live in or like what borough do you live in? Like sometimes you're like, I don't know, I'll speak for myself, but I'm like, ooh, oh, they live in that neighborhood? Like, I don't know, that kind of thing. But it's like, that's so irrelevant if you're like really looking for a connection. And on top of that, I would say like in terms of taking it lightly, I think like unless it really doesn't feel like a match, like, I don't know, I kind of a put match for people that I was like, it's worth a second conversation. Like 10 minutes is like not really long enough to get to know somebody. So just again, maybe you don't have to take it seriously, or just like, yeah, see like, oh, I would talk to this person again, like give it a try. You never know. So yeah, those are my final reflections.
Thank you. No, that's wonderful. And I see how perhaps dating could take a lot of time and energy for you. You've given everyone such a good chance. I love it.
But maybe that's the problem. I don't know. Maybe I'm just trying to make friends. Who knows?
No, it's good. It's good. Thank you so much, Sheridan.